you know who this is. This is George Floyd, and it's very inspirational to me because this is taken in Ramallah in Palestine. And as many of you know, there were protests in solidarity with George Floyd around the world. But this one, this particular photo really caught my eye. All right. So we at Black Alliance for Peace, we take issues of policing, police brutality, militarism, and just for the Palestinian people as being very interconnected. And we also like to focus on political education and organizing, because that helps us to be well informed and it helps to guide our work. So, regarding policing, this first slide here, and I'm sure many of you probably know some of these things, but policing in the United States is derived from the slave catchers or patty rollers from the days of chattel slavery. They would go out and recapture us and bring us back to the slave master. And they also served in the role of monitoring and policing our movements in terms of where we live, what kind of jobs we had. And this is also where anti-loitering laws come from as well. Okay. I live here in Philadelphia. I've been here now 5 years. And a lot of my comrades here have told me that the relationship between the police and the Black community is very old, bloody, and racist. And to that effect, the Philadelphia Inquirer just last month did a very interesting article on that history, and it goes back to over 100 years. So one of the things I thought that was very notable is that in October of 1871, there was the shooting death of voting rights activist Octavius Cato. Also, the Fraternal Order of Police began in 1915 in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and became a much larger national organization in a mere 3 years. Okay. So, and Philadelphia police even bragged about what they call their tear gas squad, which began in the 1920s. All right. Moving forward to the turbulent times of the 1960s and 70s, at this time we saw the beginning use of SWAT teams, the National Guard being called out, etc. One incident that many of you, I don't know, I don't want to date anybody, but this is a picture of the Ohio National Guard firing on the students at Kent State University. This happened May 4th, 1970, where 4 students were killed. 11 days later, Black students at Jackson State University were having a series of protests, and these 2 students were shot and killed by city and state police, again on May 15th, 1970. Moving forward again, we're looking at here the police and military gear in Ferguson, Missouri, April of 2015, during the protests against the killing of Michael Brown. And they had quite a bit of artillery and all kind of other technology that they used. Arrow. Okay. Also, there are several videos that show how the Portland police handled themselves and were cooperating with federal officers during the protests this summer, which they wound up contradicting city officials. Somebody would say, oh no, they're not working together. There are no federal agents here, but it turns out that they were. And several videos from citizens, independent journalists, and even mainstream journalists prove that fact. So this militarization of the police does not assure public safety. If anything, it makes it more dangerous. It makes it more dangerous for Black folks, for queer folks, homeless folks, and even for our movement as well, particularly when they bring out all this kind of artillery during protests. Okay. So in terms of this militarization of the police, we at Black Alliance for Peace, we urge you to make note of some of these programs that are going on now. One of them is called Operation Relentless Pursuit. It's a program that was started last year, meant to combat violent crime in several US cities. It offers more money and resources to encourage closer collaboration among federal agencies, local police, district attorneys, sheriffs, etc. Funding was also provided to hire approximately 400 additional police officers. But we must ask ourselves, who is this really for when the research shows that violent crimes in some of these cities had even decreased, right? So is this directed toward our movement, or is it somehow they're trying to assert their control over people as we witness the crisis of capitalism? Because we know what capitalist system, it needs the police, it needs its military to maintain and ensure control. So we, a Black Alliance for Peace, we call for community control of the police. And by that we mean that community control of the police is a principle of self-determination. We must organize ourselves to shift power into our hands so that the material conditions of our communities will improve for the better. Imagine, if you will, political power in our hands to determine police department budgets, methods of policing, accountability for police misconduct, etc. It also means we must organize ourselves to demand, we must demand all the resources necessary for healthy communities, such as access to healthcare, affordable, safe housing, quality public schools, mental health and substance abuse treatment programs, job training for living wage jobs with benefits, etc. This is what healthy communities look like, and this is what we mean by defunding and abolishing the police altogether. Community control of the police. Okay, also another program is the 1033 program, where the Department of Defense has given approximately $5 billion of surplus military equipment to over 8,000 police departments across the United States, sometimes at no cost to those departments. Skip ahead here. Just this slide here, I wanted to show folks again that the solidarity with the police killing of George Floyd was around the world, several countries in Africa and Europe. Also, the picture here at the top, it's in the West Bank city of Ramallah. And at the bottom, this is Sydney, Australia. And some of you may know, in the Aboriginal people of Australia and the Maori people of New Zealand face similar struggles with the police there as well. Again, regarding militarization of police, the military, etc., we have our campaign against AFRICOM. Black Alliance for Peace currently has the U.S. out of Africa shut down AFRICOM campaign. Now, AFRICOM started under former President George Bush, but it expanded under the first Black president, Barack Obama. So we definitely disagree with this further militarization of Africa. And we find that the United States has some sort of military presence in 53 of Africa's 54 countries, yet the United States is not officially at war with any country in Africa. We surmise that the US involved this way to have access and control over Africa's resources and to counter the presence and influence of China. So we say we must everyone in our movement, we must say no to all forms of militarism, no to police and military recruitment at our schools, places of worship, recreation centers, civic associations, unemployment offices. If you go to an unemployment office, you often see these signs about joining the military or joining the National Guard, these kind of things. We say no to that. Also, they put up flyers around teen mentoring programs, jail or police release programs, etc. We also say no collaboration with weapons makers and nonprofit organizations, charities, school or after school programs, STEM learning programs that are targeting girls or students of color. One example is Raytheon and Girl Scout cookies. Do some research on Raytheon and Girl Scout cookies. You may want to find a different kind of cookie, right? So also organize our community to say yes to other vital programs that we all know we need: affordable housing, job training, etc. Skip here. Now, in researching for this presentation, I found a lot of great books and articles, videos, etc. So later, I hope that Fred can send everyone out this document that I also sent, a list of possible readings. Very, very helpful, very current. But these 3 books here really stuck out in my mind. I haven't read these books yet, but I have skimmed through them in a local bookstore. But I would invite you all to perhaps start a study group on some of these books, or maybe even invite the authors to a future Zoom event. I think it would be very helpful. Okay, just want to show regarding solidarity with the people of Palestine. This is Ethel Miner, who I had the pleasure of meeting in 2010 at the 50th anniversary of SNCC conference held at Shaw University in Raleigh, North Carolina. She's standing there in the middle of my big brother, Nkrumah-Ture, and the first president of independent Ghana, Kwame Nkrumah. She is that important link between SNCC and the Palestinian struggle and its position against Zionism. She wrote a series of articles for the SNCC newsletter, and as some of you know, after that there was a lot of controversy, but they were definitely on point. Again, my big brother Kwame-Ture. Huey Newton, then a member of the Black Panther Party, meeting with PLO chairman Yasser Arafat in the 1970s. Razmia Ode and our very own Angela Davis. Unfortunately, Razmia was deported from the country, I think 2 or 3 years ago after a campaign of several years. Okay, this is something that Malcolm X is not very well known for, an essay he wrote called Zionist Logic. It was printed in the September 17th, 1964 edition of the Egyptian Gazette while he was in the country at the invitation of Gabriel Nasser. And I hope you all get a chance to read it later. It's very fascinating how far ahead he was at that time. Now, this picture is one that I really like because I know several of the young people in this picture. It's members of Dream Defenders, Black Lives Matter, Black Youth Project, activists from Ferguson, etc., who were in Palestine in July of 2016. And also, this is a picture from an edition of the Electronic Intifada, August of 2016. Perhaps some of you here in this meeting have been to Palestine as well. And I definitely like the pictures that someone showed earlier. But right now, we see how a lot of these things are connected in ways that we probably did not imagine. There's a program called CVE, Combating Violent Extremism, where the police and or other law enforcement agencies spy on the Arab community, the Muslim community, invited out to the mosque to give so-called quote unquote informative presentations, etc. But for me, the CVE is nothing but a program to not only spy on people, but also to create and nurture snitches so that you will report back to these law enforcement agencies about activities and activism going on in the mosque or in the Muslim community, the Arab community, etc. And CVE also reminds me a lot of what we know now about COINTELPRO, where police send in informants and what have you into our social justice movements. There were informants in SNCC, there were informants in the Black Panther Party, there were informants in the American Indian Movement, there were informants in the Nation of Islam, Students for a Democratic Society, and a whole host of other organizations. And we know the aftermath of what happened with COINTELPRO. Matter of fact, I was reminded that today is the anniversary of the Chicago police murder of Fred Hampton and Mark Clark, December 4th, 1969, right? So that, I just say all that to, you know, really show how that some of these things continue, but they have different names. They manifest themselves in different ways, but the spying on our movement, the disruption of our movement continues. So in closing, I just want to say that our struggle continues. Our solidarity among all of our movements must continue. We must have the kind of political education that helps to cement those relationships and that we strengthen those relationships. we need to look at, and I want to give a shout out to our comrades from Jewish Voices for Peace, starting the program Deadly Exchange, where U.S. police departments are trained in Israel. This includes several cities here in the United States, such as Philadelphia, New York City, Chicago, Washington, D.C., and others. As a matter of fact, in doing research for this, I found out that the police department of Louisville, Kentucky, in 2011, some of their officers went to Israel for this training. And that was at the time when their police chief was a Black man named Robert White. So we know from that, it doesn't matter the race of your police chief or your mayor, etc. These are their politics, and this is what we're up against. So I want to close now. Looking forward to any questions you may have. And thank you all again for your attention, and thanks to all of you, our comrades, for this invitation. Thank you all very, very much.
And Betsy in Baltimore asks, what demandments do we have for Joe Biden? And it's not, of course, just Joe, but it's this administration. What are we going to go for? What are we going to demand now around white supremacy and the militarization of the police?
I would just say, do a Google search of Joe Biden and who I call Kamala Harris regarding Zionism and the Palestinians. They both admit to being Zionists in so many words.
Yeah.
So I have no faith in this oncoming administration of Biden and Harris. I have no confidence in them whatsoever. As a matter of fact, I have nothing but contempt for them. They both support cops. They both support the militarization of police. Biden himself said he's not in favor of defunding the police. Here comes Barack Obama out of wherever saying, oh, you're going to push people away with the phrase defunding. They are only there to defend this capitalist system. And they obviously are afraid if this momentum continues that we had this summer with hundreds, if not thousands of young people in the streets protesting police terrorism, multi-generational, multiracial, multi-gender, but Black-led. They fear that. This country got shook. As old as I am, I don't remember, and I observed a lot of protests on TV back in the 70s, 80s, and 90s as I was coming of age politically. I don't ever remember seeing a police building being set on fire. It's a new day, right? So I think that's one thing. But if we look at the political history of Biden in terms of mass incarceration, his advocating for war against Iraq, etc., the political history of Kamala Harris as a prosecutor, where she never brought a police officer, never pressed charges against a police officer for violence or misconduct, not once. These are the kind of things we need to do for our political education so we can share that with other people. So I have no confidence in them whatsoever.
When we organized this event, we were looking at white supremacists' role. This was before the election, actually, and as we've seen, organized Trumpists are showing up with their weapons. Have you seen this, Asantewaa, in the local struggles that you've been involved in? And have you seen cooperation between the police and the white supremacists, the armed white supremacists? Yes.
Yes. Back a few months ago, when we had the protests here in solidarity with George Floyd in the area called Fishtown, there was a Black Lives Matter protest in the middle of Girard Avenue, a major street in that part of town. Some local young white men came out, walked to Girard Avenue from throughout Fishtown, and were carrying golf clubs, baseball bats, and hammers. And they attacked some people in the crowd. And that too was caught on video. And the police were standing around and they did nothing. In South Philadelphia, some folks, again, young white men, took it upon themselves to defend Target and Walmart, right? Now, regarding South Philadelphia, at that point, there had not been any, what I call unauthorized taking at that time, but I guess they wanted to preempt that. But where does that sense of entitlement, that kind of arrogance come from, that you think it's up to you to protect Target and Walmart especially, given their labor practices, right? These young white men who were in Fishtown area, one of them who was caught on video and was arrested had a prior history of starting fights. So I think he caught some serious charges, but that tends to be a regular occurrence. And I think it's always been there, but certainly the selection of Trump as president brought more of that to the fore. Racism and white supremacy is a political problem. Therefore, it requires a political solution. I would ask that all of our white brothers and sisters, our white comrades, join an organization. Join an organization. Now, as Ann just alluded to, depending on what kind of event that you're participating in, whatever privilege that may exist, and privilege it's not just race or white privilege, there's all kinds of privileges, right? Use that privilege strategically in an organization to get a desired result. So in the case that Ann just mentioned, that's a good one. Here in Philadelphia, when we've had our large marches, white people on bicycles get at intersections because we know there's been a problem of motorists charging through crowds, right? And everybody has their camera out. That's one thing. I think what's inspiring to me is the original Rainbow Coalition, before Reverend Jesse Jackson took it over. The original Rainbow Coalition was an organization of young working class whites in Chicago that formed this grassroots radical organization. And that original Rainbow Coalition was the Young Patriots organization, the Black Panther Party, and the Young Lords. Look all of that up, the original Rainbow Coalition, and they each had their separate, distinct organizations, while at the same time, they formed this coalition. And the only reason why they didn't last but for a few years was due to the Democratic Party in Chicago and the daily machine and the harassment they got from the police. Every time we make those type of efforts, it's always the government, the police, the FBI, those kind of forces that try to disrupt it. But we know it can work, because every time we try to make it work, we be doing good for a while, but then here comes the police. And I think also too, there's a word of caution regarding the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party is not the friend or savior of our movement. The Democratic Party is where our movements go to die. They get siphoned off into the NGO foundation complex, the nonprofit industrial complex, etc. So for all of our white comrades, join an organization. I must also say here that as a movement, we will never, and we unapologetically will not tolerate any type of Islamophobia or anti-Jewish bigotry. At the same time, we are unapologetically against Zionism and all of its theological and political manifestations.
Yeah.
There's nothing worse than hearing a Black Christian talk about Israel, right? If you look at the document that Fred is going to send you, there's a warning about Reverend Dumasani Washington and Chloe Valdry, two Black Christians, very prominent and very Zionist. And the worst problem with Zionism comes from some Christian folks I know. So if you can imagine these Black Christians going around, being Zionists, Chloe Valdry has now formed her own consulting firm called Theory of Engagement, Theory of Enchantment. And she's going to teach you or your company or your nonprofit how to be compassionate and filled with love, again, to be anti-racist. When just 6-7 years ago, she was doing YouTube videos calling Palestinians violent and terrorists, and they deserve what they get. So it's not a new hustle. So let's be aware of all those kind of things as well.
you know, the military in the United States is very good at offering various incentives. It's, you know, it's an economic draft, we like to say. And young, especially young Black and brown people go into the military, men and women, because they think they're going to get certain benefits that they wouldn't have otherwise, like the, you know, tuition, free education, and so forth. Could you speak to how you counter that type of thing most effectively?
It's very easy. Show them all the statistics of homeless veterans. Show them all the statistics of veterans who have post-traumatic stress disorder and they're not being properly treated. Show them all the veterans who are seeking or have been through some type of mental health treatment program. This is the part we don't show our young people. And I think for many of our organizations that are out here, they need to be creating programs and things for our young people. We got all these mega churches where the preacher has a jet plane. But why doesn't that church give their millions, whatever money they raise, and put it into programs for young people? We need to tell our young people the truth about the military. We need to tell them about the bombings of the drone bombings in Muslim countries, the bombing of Yemen, all the sexual abuse and sexual harassment and rapes in the US military that goes on not just against women. Yeah. We need to tell them the whole truth and then put political pressure on politicians and other folks to create opportunities for our young people. For these politicians here in Philadelphia especially, they need to be able to tell us, why are they in bed with developers in their own district? Why are there so many vacant city-owned houses in Philadelphia that could provide housing for homeless people?
Yeah.
For politicians in Philadelphia, we need to find out how many of them got a check from the Fraternal Order of Police. This is where we must do our homework.
We've been talking about white supremacy. And the general question is, how does the law support white supremacy, and how does the law ignore white supremacy? And then Phil, for you, essentially the question is, what are the elements of privilege asserted by Israeli settlers, and how does the law support them? Jewish privilege, essentially. It's an aspect of white supremacy, as you mentioned before. So maybe we can go first with the US-based struggles of how does the law in the United States support white supremacy or ignore white supremacy? And we can talk about the criminal justice system, as an example, but I think it applies in many situations. Mm-hmm. Asantewaa, do you want to start, or Anne, do you want to start?
I'll let them start.
Or Phil, do you want to start? Okay, Asantewaa, you're the only person who's unmuted right now, so why don't you start?
Okay, so the question is in terms of how the laws are written?
Well, yeah, how does it support or ignore white supremacy? It does both in certain ways, right?
Well, it's like you have a law that's on the books, but is it enforced? If it's not enforced, why isn't it enforced? Right? We have a problem here in Philadelphia, stop and frisk. Our current mayor, Mayor Kinney, ran on a platform of stopping stop and frisk. Now, he hasn't done it yet. He hasn't really put out he hasn't put in a lot of work on that. Now, they did some kind of little something where it's supposed to have went down some. But again, it's the question of what laws are enforced and why. What laws are not enforced and why? When who benefits?
Yeah.
So when I say, we must be organized, I'm saying that in the broad sense. But in terms of these issues, it means we would have to become the experts on certain issues to organize ourselves with others to hold people accountable and at the very least embarrass them on camera. So I would say that for one thing, changing laws may be another tactic to use, but that presupposes there are people who you may want to elect to change those laws. Because sometimes we have politicians who appear to be progressive and want to do the right thing, and then once they get in office, they forget about the people who worked on that campaign and voted for them, etc. So how do we organize ourselves to really be more politically savvy and to be able to watch out for that kind of thing? In the course of doing our Palestine solidarity work, we're called anti-Semitic. But what I use to push back on those folks, can you tell me who are and are not Semitic people? I came of age in a time when Jewish comrades who were anti-imperialists had to struggle among themselves to not only be anti-imperialist, but also anti-Zionist, again, in all of its theological and political manifestations. Zionism is not just political, it's also theological in terms of how we misinterpret the scriptures, right? So what we need to do as part of our political education is go to our Jewish comrades who have written about who are and are not Semitic people. And there's lots of them. There's lots of them. In the piece that I sent to Fred to send out to everyone later on, there's a couple of articles. One is that Semitic is a language group, not a race or ethnic group, written in Counterpunch back in 2003. Another article, it's time to recognize the term anti-Semitism is a misnomer. There are hundreds, if not thousands of articles. We need to find them. And this is one of the weaknesses of us on the left. We need to be able to push back on folks when they come at us with that. Because as BDS continues to grow, and every time you want to support BDS, because you know it violates Palestinians' rights, they call us anti-Semitic, but I push them back. And that's what I used to push them back with. Then they get silent and they go off somewhere else. Leave me alone.